Fellow at the University Research Center. Welcome to our Lunchtime Faculty Research Presentation Series. I'd like to thank the Percy Wooten Research Fund, which keeps us going and helps us do our great work. And I am honored today to introduce the supremely competent, very thoughtful friend of mine, Dr. Rachel Willis. Dr. Rachel Van Hoffwagen Willis is the director of the Westover Honors Community and an assistant professor at Lynchburg, teaching courses in composition, literature, and interdisciplinary topics. She holds a PhD in English from Old Dominion University, specializing in the intersections of rhetoric and writing theories, digital humanities, and popular culture. Her published research has explored the constructions of gender in literature and popular culture. Dr. Willis's current work examines the way music playlists construct and circulate rhetoric to reinforce cultural myths. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rachel Willis.
Thanks for being here. Thank you to the Percy Wooten Research Center for giving us really all the opportunities to do stuff like this. I wasn't actually expecting anyone to come, so I'm excited and nervous and appreciative of your presence. So I grew up listening to country music, and in Southern California, let's just say I was maybe the only one. Everyone else was listening to K-rock and pop music, and I was singing at the top of my lungs to Shania Twain and the Chicks and Martina McBride and Garth Brooks and all the other fun country stars of the 1990s. And I listened to music, when I came to Virginia to college. It was a little more popular here. In fact, back when I was an undergrad, we had something called bull bucking in Boonesboro. And I'm pretty sure that's not a thing anymore, but it was exciting at the time. And so I felt more like, okay, this is more my style. And I loved country music. And I remember listening, this was in the mid-2000s. I'd had at least my daughter by then. And I was in the car listening to a radio interview with Sarah Evans, who had kind of dropped out of the music industry for a while and then came back in and was releasing, her next album. And the interviewer asked her something that I just at that time had no context for. The interviewer said, "In this era of bro country, how do you feel being one of the only women in the genre?" And that really struck me because I had never, ever thought that we were missing women in country music. The 90s, when I was singing at the top of my lungs, we had a lot of really great female artists. And it was the fastest growing genre in terms of popularity of that decade. We had several crossover stars like Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, even Leanne Rimes got in there, and I think she got into acting for a while. Yeah, I remember her being on tabloids. And so that interview and that question in particular really hit me hard and caused me to question a lot of the things that I've been listening to. Around the year 2018, I was driving to a race, a trail race, and I had like an hour, and I was like, I'm going to listen to country all the way and see what I hear. Because I've been thinking about that for years. And I didn't hear a single female voice that entire hour's drive. Not in the songs that they played, not in the radio programmers that were, doing their chit chat in between songs, not in the ads, not in the caller call-ins who were calling in for free tickets to a women's conference. Even those guys were the husbands. And I was like, wow, this is real because now I've experienced it. And also, what are some of these songs saying to audiences? And so that really got me interested in investigating this. from a rhetorical standpoint. And so that's my introduction. Thank you. Oh, yeah, some of my favorite stars. This was like 90s era. And so the title of my talk is How Music Playlists Construct Cultural Myths. Myths are beliefs that shape are shaped by our cultural institutions, our practices, our media, and our values. They're not like, when we talk about myths here, we're not talking about Greek mythology, about gods. We're talking about cultural narratives and things that we talk about, the way we talk about them, and then how that makes people live their lives, essentially. You can see on my screen, I've got two different performers up there. We have on my left, standing in front of Sugarcane, is Bad Bunny. He was the official headliner for the Super Bowl halftime show. And then over here, in what I used to call, well, never mind, in the white top, Kid Rock, who was headlining the All-American unofficial halftime show. And I think that this is a really great example of how music negotiates cultural myths. Because each of these halftime shows was meant to say, this is America. Right? Bad Bunny does it when he sings and he names all of the countries in North and South and Central America. And then the unofficial show does it when they say, this is our all-American show, and here is Kid Rock, and then a bunch of other Christian and country music artists. And so country music is actually pretty implicated in this version of America. It's a more conservative political version. It tends to be pretty white. It's pretty working class, rural. It's got a lot of those signifiers for our myths of America, rugged individualism, a lot of work ethic, this kind of wandering cowboy ethos. There's a lot there. We are seeing how music negotiates cultural myths through a whole bunch of things. One of the ways is performer identity, and that's who we have up here. We also have genre, rules, and discourse. So what can be said in a genre? There are certain things that you just can't say in country music, or you can't talk about, and if you do, you will be ostracized, you'll get death threats. I really got to experience this when, in 2001, my favorite band at the time, the Chicks, they were canceled from country music. And when we say canceled, when we talk about the Chicks, we mean it. Radio stopped playing their music. There were stations that said, bring your Chicks CDs, we'll get a tractor and crush them, like we'll make this an event. It was a big thing. It wasn't let's talk bad about them for a few months and then they're back in the industry. They were gone. And so that was because they said George Bush wasn't our president. They said that at a concert in Great Britain. We also see this happening through mediums and what I call circulatory ecologies. So this is how you listen to music. Currently, we get our music through radio and through streaming. Those tend to be the dominant ways that listeners listen to music. And then we also have alternative circulatory ecologies. So live music counts if you're going to a concert or just a nice coffee shop where they have a local band playing, that counts. And that's one of the ways music negotiates cultural myths. And then we also have lyrical narratives. So what is actually being said in the lyrics of the songs that you're listening to. There are other things that I'm not going to talk about, but just know that we're doing this in a lot of different ways, and it's pretty mediated. It's mediated through production, through distribution, through circulation, and then kind of at our own level too. So when I was growing up, it seemed like I was the only one who did listen to the music lyrics. All my friends were like, oh, it's just vibes, I like the beat. And I'm like, but what are they saying? So I always kind of wondered, am I the only one that's influenced by music lyrics? And it turns out I'm not. So there's a lot of good scholarship that says, yes, people are impacted by cultural narratives. This changes things about what we believe, and our human behavior can also be impacted. Different studies can kind of say that the effect is variable. For example, one study by Flynn et al. Said that they found that if you listen to music that objectifies women, you are more likely to describe objectifying beliefs about women in your own life. And so, and not just beliefs, but also treatment in your relationships. So there is a connection there. And I want to talk about this specifically around country music, because country music, kind of what I was talking about earlier with the more conservative beliefs and ideology, they have very specific cultural myths around gender. So one of those things is country music articulates a class-based split where the women tend to be occupying the ideal middle-class space, and the men tend to be occupying more of a working-class space. And when we talk about space, that's pretty specific too. Women are associated with the home and church in country music, and men tend to be more on the road, they're in bars, they're out on the farms, so they have they're more free to wander, they have more independence. Scholar Braden Leap argues that the working class view of man in country music tends to be organized around things like blue-collar work, this idea of the male provider role, heterosexual desire, and quite a bit of nostalgia for the way things used to be, or, for the idealized childhood, growing up on the farm, that kind of representation. There are three kind of archetypes in country for the country man. You have the country boy, and this is the guy who is still a provider, but in this role, he provides alcohol, a truck, and a place to hook up, right? So he gets to provide that to the country girl in this picture. And then you also have the lover. So the lover is maybe a little more devoted. He's contemplating family life. And then you get to the family man. Now, you also have the joke in country, which is, what do you get when you play a country song backwards? Do you know the punchline? You get your dog back, you get your truck back, you get your girl back. I think you might also get your job back. But even that joke presupposes that country music is a guy's music, right? This is from the guy's perspective. These are what he has lost and what he is trying to get back. And I think playlists give us a really interesting view for how this works. They have circulated plenty of cultural myths that I've bought into. This was one of them for a little while. When I was in college, I was like, I don't have cowgirl boots, and I don't have cutoff jeans, and I'm going to bull bucking in Boonesboro. So I went on a shopping trip. So these things do have real world impacts, and not just on me. So the way that I'm talking about music playlists, I kind of want to clarify. A music playlist is kind of any set of songs that you hear, and these are always changing. If you think about what you tune into on the radio, you're not getting the same playlist twice. Your situation is often also different when you're listening to music. So if you get up and you turn on your country music Spotify premium playlist, you're getting kind of a different playlist than you were yesterday when you did the same thing. Although you might hear some of the same songs. A playlist has this sort of what we call inherent rhetoricity. And in rhetoric and writing studies, rhetoricity follows a couple of different theorists like Laurie Breeze and Byron Hawk. Basically, it says any messages have this inherent potential to be persuasive. And you don't necessarily need a speaker for that, and you don't need, a specific intentional message. It's just there. It exists. And my argument says that a song has rhetoricity, and that rhetoricity will linger in a playlist as other songs are played. So for example, if one song talks about, the country girl dancing in cutoff jeans and cowboy boots in the back of my truck, and then 3 songs later, there's another song about hooking up with that girl, right? That is rhetoricity that is then lingering and being amplified by the next song that kind of hits on that same theme. This constructs a musical environment. We call this ambient rhetoric. And ambient rhetoric is really related to attunement as well. So it's not just what's in the environment, it's also what you're attuned to in the environment. So a great example of this is, I do not like caves. Anybody here like caves? Some are like, I have no idea whether I like it or not. It scares me. When I go into a cave, I'm like, is this mountain gonna crush me? I feel like I can't breathe. So if I hear a sound like a rock falling, I am attuned to that through fear, and the message I am getting is something is not safe, let's get out of here. If you're excited about caving, you go in and you are attuned to the adventure part, right? Oh, this is new. I get to try something I haven't done before. Let me explore. You hear a sound like a rock falling, and you're like, ooh, I wonder where that is. And that's what we mean by how ambient rhetoric, it matters how you're attuned. So if you're attuned to the country girl from that photo slide earlier, and that being like a thing that's desirable, the more you hear about it, the more persuaded you'll be that that's what you need to pursue. So I sort of conclude with this by saying, the rhetoricity, the ambience being constructed in this playlist, just the general effects that the songs have, they can be amplified or they can be minimized, depending on what you hear next. So that's sort of how I'm approaching the way playlists construct meaning and accumulate meaning. And this is, I think the accumulation is really what's at work in these cultural myths. So I want to stop with the theory a little bit and talk about what's happening in country music. I've already introduced the fact that women have gone missing from what we call airplay, and airplay exists at the radio level and in the streaming level. Women are losing airplay in country music, and there's a lot of scholarship that kind of talks about how this has happened. And what they found is the women are kind of being discriminated against at various levels. So first, we have programmer Keith Hill in the 2000s saying, we don't play women back to back. We want to treat them like tomatoes in a salad. And this was called Tomatogate. I get salads. I like to buy, salads from Panera or Chick-fil-A, and there might be like 3 tomatoes in the salad. So this is not very many if we think about what a salad looks like. So we have these discriminatory practices. This also creates less and less space, things like the chicks being cut out and canceled from country music. There's fewer spaces for female artists, and women are now afraid what would happen to me if I say anything a producer doesn't want. So there's a lot of things that work against women, and as their airplays shrink, there become fewer and fewer places in women across the country music industry. So it's not just female artists that are impacted, it's also songwriters who want to write a song that a female artist would produce. Because now there are fewer opportunities for me there, and now I have to partner with a guy so that I can get a male artist to buy a song, because that's the only stuff that's getting played. So it creates fewer and fewer positions kind of across the industry. Playlists have created this issue by minimizing women, by not playing female artists back to back. We have pulled them out of the genre for over 20 years. And all of these discourses, like I mentioned, Tomatogate, well, that came out in like 2018. The CMAs was like, no, we love women. And they had this, it was headlined by all the women of country music. There's like 20 of them on their CMA concert. And then nothing changed. So we know that this is an issue, but there's not a lot of momentum towards fixing it. And Playlist created it, and I think they also reproduce it. So this is an ongoing project that's happening. My research and sort of how I'm thinking about this is contributing to the overall field. I'm extending that scholarship that says that women are being discriminated against in the industry, and then I'm highlighting Playlist kind of as a way of thinking about this in multiple avenues. So the first way is Playlists accumulate meaning through these lyrics in the songs, and then they're also accumulating sonic identity through what we hear. So it's happening in a way that makes all of this bigger than anyone intended it for it to be. So when Keith Hill said, we're not going to play women back to back, and then started doing that in the playlist, that had this outsized effect of marginalizing women in country music. And that is not what was intended at first. It sort of exceeded the agency of kind of the sum of its parts. And so what I am trying to emphasize here is that playlists themselves have agency. It's not just the programmers that are creating this effect. It's the accumulative effect of the playlist and the rhetoric and the arguments that audiences are listening to and the way that changes the taste of the industry. But it's kind of all right there. The playlists are at fault. So I've already said that country music, they're sort of aimed at male concerns. And specifically since 2001 and then 2008 and the financial crisis that really hit working class communities hard, we start to see country music becoming bro country. And that was originally designed to kind of recuperate the country boy and that specific identity as important and worthy of status in America. Music playlists are cementing this project. It's really hard for us to walk this back. And we're going to see this in the playlist that I was looking at last week. So I went to the charts, and last week we had country streaming songs. This was the top 5 for the Billboard's charts here. And streaming is like Spotify, Apple Music, that sort of thing. You can see we got a lady up there, right? Ella Langley with Choosing Texas. And she's not just number 1, she's also number 5. So she's got 2 singles out that are charting really high in country streaming. She was also number 1 2 weeks ago in country airplay. She's fallen to number 2 behind Jason Aldean, How Far Does the Goodbye Go? And then we've got Morgan Wallen, Shabuzi, and Jelly Roll, and then Thomas Rhett featuring Jordan Davis in country airplay. And Ella Langley is having a nice spring. She was the first solo female artist in a couple of years to chart both the Billboard 100 and the top of country airplay. She's only the 7th solo female artist to do that. The first was Jeannie something or other, way back in, I think, the 40s or 50s with Harper Valley PTA. And then Dolly Parton charted a couple. I think we got Taylor Swift, and then we got Beyonce, Tate McRae, and now Ella Langley. So I was curious, the country airplay, that's radio. So if I tune into my radio station, Star Country 94.9, am I going to hear Ella Langley? Is this going to translate, in other words? So I looked at my local country station. I pulled a whole week's worth of playlists, and they played Ella Langley 50 times. Now this, Choosing Texas, they played specifically 34 times. So I am not good at math. I think that's 5 times a day on average. Is that right, math people? Close? Okay. And then her other singles, and she's also got a collaboration with Riley Green, get her up to 50 for the whole week. And you can see the lyrics here. This is a heartbreak song. It's a breakup song. She's from Tennessee, and her guy is choosing a girl from Texas. And she can tell because he's two-stepping around the room. So then I was like, well, what about Jason Aldean? Because he's number 1 on the country airplay. He was played 127 times. And his single, How Far Does the Goodbye Go, very similar thematically, got played 60 times. So his single, number 1 on the country airplay chart, got played 10 more times than Ella Langley got played at all that week. What this means is country and the sound of country is a specifically male sound. Jada Watson, she's an established scholar doing this work. She says country music has so many male artists, it's an indistinguishable sound. They're indistinguishable from each other. And that's an interesting problem because if you're hearing 80 to 90% male artists when you're listening to country music, if you're listening to a whole hour and you don't hear a single female voice, then that is attuning you to the sort of universality of the male voice, right? It's normalizing that. If we can get the female voices in, that is a difference. And it can change what you're attuned to as a listener. Right now, we might play an hour of country music, hear 1 to 2 female voices in the whole hour, and hear 10 to 13 male voices in that hour. And so it's just it's inequitable, right? It's too big, too imbalanced. So for the whole week, there were 2,615 total songs played. 2,144 of them were male solo artists. When you add in the collaborations, there was 121 of those where you heard a band or a duet or a feature artist where you had both male and female voices. It adds up to 87% of last week's total airplay on that radio station. You'd hear a male voice. So then I thought, well, let's look at how many spins some of the more popular male artists received that week, just to add a little bit of context. Morgan Wallen was heard 137 times, Jason Aldean 127, Luke Combs 136, for a total of 400 times. We only had 352 female-only songs in that whole week. 3 artists had 48 more songs than all of the women in that week. What that also means is there were 395 unique male artists that were played last week, compared to just 67 female. So 3 of the 395 male artists had more spins, more airplay than all of the female songs. That's a lot. That's very, very outsized. So you can see how the voice matters, right? If you're only hearing male voices and they tend to blend together, that becomes the sound of country. But then there's also the issue of, well, what is being said in the songs? How is that accumulating rhetoric? And so I got to work at about 8:15 today, so I was like, what does the hour look like for a Monday commute before that? So let's say 7:30 to 8:30. This is what they played. They played Jelly Roll, Rascal Flatts, featuring the Jonas Brothers. That's an interesting collaboration. Lone Star, Jordan Davis, Jason Aldean, Tucker Wetmore, Florida Georgia Line, George Strait, Morgan Wallen, Zach Top, Shabuzi, Luke Combs, our first female artist, Riley Green, featuring Ella Langley, so that's a male-female collab, and Low Cash. So this entire hour, every song you heard was a male voice, plus one that features Ella Langley. I have color-coded them because I think it's important to talk about the lyrical themes that the playlist is constructing and what that says and what that tells us. So Jelly Roll, his Need a Favor is in red, and so is Shabuzi's Good News. This is, these songs are about guys who are like regretting stuff that's happened in their life. Jelly Roll specifically says, I only pray when I need a favor. And then Shabuzi is like, nobody told me life was hard, which is a lie if you listen to country music, because he must not have grown up with it like me. But yeah, so he's like, I just need good news. So there's like regret and this feeling of like, man, my life is bad. I'm in a bad place. In the light blue, with Rascal Flatts featuring the Jonas Brothers, it's I Dare You. And this is a guy daring a girl to fall in love with him so that they can have that picket fence dream. And I color-coded it similar to Low Cash's Hometown Home, which is a song that's like, hey, we could go to California or Carolina, but we could also stay here and build a house next to my grandma and go to church where I got baptized. Doesn't that sound nice? And so those are more, they're like the lover, but they're also projecting a little bit of the American dream and what that looks like. In the darker blue, Lone Star, I'm Already There. It's color-coded with similar themes to George Strait, Carrying Your Love With Me, and Luke Combs' Sleepless in a Hotel Room. In all three of these, the male speaker is on the road and missing his girl or his family. And then that is a common theme in country, and similar to kind of where we're going next in the dark green. So we've got four of these: Jordan Davis, Jason Aldean, Zach Top, and Riley Green. This is the lover, but the lover who has lost the girl. And so the theme around here is kind of like, my life is crappy because we broke up, and I'm really sad, and everything's fine, but I'm not fine. There's a lot of like alcohol in these songs. They cope with whiskey a lot. Specifically in Whiskey Drink, where the male speaker says, hey, I haven't talked to you a while, Jack. Let's chat about what's going on. I'm very sad and very lonely. I've also got Tucker Wetmore. That is not color-coded because it's kind of doing some different things, but I think it is got a few similar themes to this dark green. So in brunette, the lover has also lost his girl. The girl is a country girl. So she's the blonde in the cutoff jeans who likes to go out on dirt roads in the truck. And he says, that's my type. I need a different type. I need a girl from north of the Mason-Dixon line. I need a brunette. Then we have kind of the country boy in purple with Florida Georgia lines around here linked to Morgan Wallen's 20 cigarettes. These are about partying with girls, and then Morgan Wallen gets a hookup by the time he gets to that last cigarette. So you can see these themes kind of building on each other. And what this says about what it means to be a man in the world, what it means to be a girl. There are messages that are not just being shared in the music, but then also resonating and accumulating ontological reality and persuasive power. I've looked at playlists since 2018. So I wanted to give you a little bit of data because there have been some changes. In 2018, when I first started looking at playlists, I did a week, and 10% of tracks had a female voice, and we heard male voices on over 93% of the week. In 2022, that went down to 91%, with most of the improvements being tracked to an increase in male-female collaboration. And that's one way of adding female voices back into airplay, but it's not a particularly lucrative one because you have to split the profits. In 2026, the era of Ella Langley, we had male voices on 86% of the week's spin. So in 8 years that we've been talking about this, we've seen a bit of improvement. Of course, these are just isolated weeks. The percentages might go up and down depending on who's charting hits, so that's something to keep in mind. This week could very well be an anomaly that we attribute to Ella Langley in 4 years. But we do see a lot of the same themes in the musical rhetoric that we hear. So in 2018, I looked at a Monday morning commute playlist. We have a theme of working class rural identities. There were no female voices heard in that hour, so it was all male. We also got a lot of love and sexual desire. There was like more than I wanted to analyze the hookup songs in that playlist. And then very traditional gender representation. So we did have a few songs that were very much the guy is like out raising hell, and then the lover, the girl, she is his like angel, right? She keeps him safe, she saves him, she's playing that kind of role. In 2022, we had very similar themes, and then some new ones were emerging. So I tracked a surprising amount of nostalgia for small town working class life. And this was really interesting on the heels of COVID. I think it's very easy to say that COVID and a lot of the let's stay home, that created some really interesting discourse around the breakdown of, family units. A lot of people did not enjoy staying home with their family during COVID. And so there was a bit of a need to re-articulate and reassert the value of the family, right? And the importance of these bonds, the importance of the simple life. I did like getting to I have young kids and we weren't doing everything all the time. I did like that part of COVID. And so this is kind of invested in that same sort of narrative of let's return to the simple life where we didn't have all these city pressures. I also saw a lot more heartbreak songs in the 2022 playlist, and that's where we actually heard a few more female voices in that 2022 playlist. And then substance use began to emerge as well. I'm thinking also related to COVID, people are just drinking at home more. And so we start to see whiskey, strawberry wine, beer, bar songs becoming a lot more popular again. In 2026, those same themes stick out, along with the road and the home or the girl as kind of that anchoring tether to life. And then the substance use also evolved. So now in this playlist, we had multiple references to cigarettes, which honestly I haven't seen in country in 20 years. So that has definitely come full circle. So in other words, the playlist and the lyrics they construct, together with the voices you're not hearing, are creating really interesting and powerful cultural myths about what America looks like, how we should live, how we interact with each other, and whether cutoff jeans are for you. There's some really consistent visual iconography in country. Things that you're going to see since really its inception, and that includes the value of the rural hometown, the value of the road because it grants independence, the truck, and the Chevy in particular tends to get a lot of airtime. You also have blue-collar work being really, really important, and this is, working on the farm, got some dirt on my boots, It's that sense of sometimes even the lost job, and why I'm in the bar drowning in Jim Beam. The sense of we need to remind America that we're here and that we are important. But what gets lost in that is the female perspective, the subject identity that might speak back to some of those narratives, especially around substance use. The fact that this is emerging and so many songs are about substance use and alcohol in particular, I think is a really interesting phenomenon, because women were responsible for prohibition, because their guys were out getting drunk and spending all the money, and they were like, we need to get rid of alcohol. This is bad. And so we're kind of coming full circle, and I think that's interesting. So that kind of concludes my original research, and I wanted to kind of move into thinking about what this looks like going forward. So just to remind you what we talked about, country music has limited women from their airplay. They've kept it to about 15% of their overall radio and streaming airplay. And this has had the effect of cementing the marginalization of women in the genre. The music playlists themselves construct and circulate ideology through the accumulation of the rhetoric in the songs and the rhetoric in the voice that universalizes male concerns and perspectives. The agentic force of the playlist doing this have really exceeded what radio should have been able to do to the industry. One of the ways that I have tried to focus on this project is, where is there space to change? I've mentioned we've been having this conversation since at least 2018 and really earlier, and yet we haven't seen a ton of movement of that needle. We haven't seen a return to more equitable gender distribution in the industry. So we've been trying to do things from the production side and from the distribution side. And I haven't talked about it, but there are a lot of gatekeepers in the industry, starting with songwriters, producers, male artists themselves, female artists, to radio programmers. Like, there's a lot of gatekeepers that make it hard. And so I'm wondering, what if we just start playing more Shania Twain? We know people like that. She wasn't in the week's playlist. Either it was Reba McEntire, and I don't know if you know, but Reba McEntire is experiencing a resurgence. She's on The Voice. She's in a TV show. She just released new music. She's not being played. But we're still playing Alabama. Song of the South gets played every day. And it has been played every day since at least 2018, probably earlier. So why aren't we playing Reba McEntire and Shania Twain? Why are we only hearing Taylor Swift, Tim McGraw? It's a nice, nice set of albums there. So some additional things we can ask is streaming the answer? Can streaming give us some opportunities here? And I think it can, but part of the way the algorithms construct playlists, it actually narrows user taste and ends up reproducing the same industry patterns we see in radio. Now, I could create my own country music playlist, and I can listen to that music, and those artists will then benefit from that. But unless it's platformed and circulated widely and promoted through Spotify, that's not going to have the kind of impact that the Spotify platform playlists have. So there's some opportunity here. It's really not being realized through the current structure of the streaming giants. The other questions that I think we need to be talking about is, I've already mentioned that there is some political ties here. Country music tends to be very backward looking. I mentioned they played Alabama every day. And they're from the 80s, guys. So we tend to be backwards looking, and yet that, conservative drive, I think also means that we're implicated in all of these talks about what's happening now in America. And we have some serious cultural divides in America. Things around race, racial identity, gender is still a problem. And so even though we've got Ella Langley, and even though we have Beyonce from 2 years ago, who, tops the charts and then wasn't in this week's playlist, we have Shabuzi, who looks great, and I like his songs, but they're still not necessarily moving the needle on racial equity and inclusion in the genre either. So there's still a lot of gatekeeping, still a lot of questions around what does it mean to be a country artist, who gets to call themselves that, and who in the end gets to say they're American, and what does that look like. So I appreciate you guys sitting through this. I know it was long. If you've got time, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Very persuasive. Thank you. I'm so interested. And I've heard you talk about it, but it was fascinating to see all the data laid out so powerfully. Mm-hmm. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the homogenization of voices. Mm. Because on one hand, you're pointing out that all of the men's voices start to blend together. Mm-hmm. So is it that we are imagining them kind of one Frankenstein a cumulative vision of masculinity, because all these male voices can so easily be collapsed into a single entity. But you also sort of suggested, I'm hoping you should just talk more, like that you are getting fewer female voices as well. So in other words, we're trying to ask about, I guess, like the scale of voices. Is it that because we hear more men, we have a wider imagination for what masculinity could be? Or is it because it's just like a volume game? Our imagination is more limited.
I think there's definitely a volume issue. I actually think country music has a fairly narrow view of what masculinity looks like. There are alternative versions of this. So like Saturday tends to be a day where the radio will play more women, and they'll also play more like old guy bands, like more outlaw country. Like it widens the genre a little bit on Saturdays. And I think those tend to be artists that are included in Americana, but that's not as big of a stream. So there's a lot less capital being devoted to that stream of music versus country music genre, which is more established and has a lot more money and audiences. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Rachel. I think this is also very compelling work that you presented here. Let's say one thing on the note of the homogenization of country music. In the video, 6 country songs separated at birth. That gives you a pretty good idea of how we end up in the same song. I think country music does have it. As you point out, it is probably one of the most conservative political genres going, but there has been, there's some exceptions. Like you go back to the Carter family's maybe original feminist anthem, Single Girl, Married Girl. I'm thinking of Loretta Lynn's song, The Pill, that was banned on country radio. That gives you probably some evidence for your argument as well. I think one of the spaces where we do see some better representation, and you mentioned Americana, I think the alt country genre, where you have bands like Wednesday and Waxahachie and Amanda Shires, we see kind of a really, it's almost like a boom of female singer-songwriters and performers that are doing really well. I'm thinking also of the ironically named Boy Genius, with Lucy Dacus and Phoebe Bridgers and Julian Baker. But this particular space, I think, you know, country music as well as rap music has kind of trended toward pop music.
Mm-hmm.
And pop music, as you say, has been kind of sort of narrowly defined and is most likely to reproduce those gender relations. And to your point about streaming, that's also, I agree with you that it completely reinforces what we already maybe listen to. It's not really gonna, your algorithm's not gonna turn you on to new music.
Right.
It's gonna turn you on to music that you like, you just haven't heard it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. More of the same, like
More
the
of the
6
same,
country
right.
songs you've already heard. And I think it's you know, the question of like, can't we just keep the streams separate, right? Why can't we have alt country? Why can't we have Americana and just, it's fine? And I think the answer is like, that's just such a small subgenre compared to what country music is overall. And I can track, and I didn't talk about this very much, I went a different way, but I can track the politics in American culture to a lot of the movements in country music. And so I think the fact that we just create our own ideological echo chambers, and I think that's really harmful. We need more female voices, even Shania Twain from the 90s, even Reba McEntire from the 80s. Let's play Dolly Parton, let's get those voices back so that they can at least offer some difference to what we're hearing. Any other questions?
I will.
Yeah.
Wait. One thing I like about your scholarship is you're analyzing the content of the lyrics, but also the whole media industry.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me think a little bit, and I realize it would be way too reductive to say like, who is at fault? And I'm not asking you. But I'm wondering, you mentioned gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
I assume a good chunk of country music listeners are women.
Yes, their target demographic.
I thought so. So can you talk a little bit, I mean, to what degree are women making the playlists that are either erasing their own experiences or, and I'm kind of curious about this, fashioning a vision of femininity that is, I don't know, idolized in a certain way, or like you talk about like the lover longing for the angel
Yeah.
who's going to reform him. I'm wondering, like, and maybe you can't answer the question, but like, to what degree are women listeners compelled by the version of femininity that is being presented to them, and thus contributing to its perpetuation?
100%. We're interpolated, right? We pay attention to what catches our interest, and then what catches our interest then changes us. And so if I'm listening to this, there's something in there that calls to me, and then it will continue to speak to me as long as I listen. And so the girl in the cutoff jeans that I was so like, I need that, right? That's what it means to be desirable in the culture. That I got it from the country songs. There was something in the early part of your question that I wanted to come back to. Yeah, I forgot some of it. Okay.
I was asking about sort of
the gatekeepers. Yeah. Okay, so radio programmers have been really implicated here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So there's this whole gauntlet that you have to run in country radio. You have to do this huge tour, et cetera, and do all these interviews with radio programmers who are all men in their 40s and 50s. And has been a pretty big sexual harassment problem there. Plus the artists have to pay to entertain the programmers. So it also costs them a lot. And if you don't play by the rules, they won't play your music. So this happened to Casey Musgraves when she was like, I'm talking about my legs on air. And then she came out and won the Grammy for Best Country Album. And they had this DJ convention after that where they were like, we're not gonna, like, she's just not connecting with us personally. So they didn't play her music. And she experienced a bump in sales, but it was from streaming. And her album wasn't in circulation in radio. And she didn't even market that album to radio because it had been such a problem for her before. Yeah. And radio execs will be like, we already have a blonde. Like, we don't need another girl. They'll say that. Yeah, there's enough tomatoes. We only need 2 or 3. We need a blonde and a brunette. I was actually surprised when Ella Langley, when I was like, oh, she's brunette. I was expecting like the Carrie Underwood, you know? Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.